Clive, let's begin by asking you a little bit about your early cricket career. Where did cricket start for you?
Well, Robin, I think I got involved very early because my family genes were fairly sporting. My father played rugby for South Africa, and my uncle on my mother's side, Jimmy Blankenberg, played cricket for South Africa. So I was keen on sport from a very early age.
Did that mean that you had aspirations as a boy to also play for South Africa?
Well, I can't remember that specifically, but I'm sure I did. I mean, I was lucky too because when I went to Bishop's Prep School at the age of just under 8, the cricket master was Peter van der Bijl, who'd made 125 and 97 in the timeless test against Wally Hammonside at Durban. And one couldn't really have had a nicer or a better mentor for cricket than Peter. And Bishop's had a very strong sporting tradition. Peter was an old boy, and another well-known old boy was Tuppy Owen-Smith. In fact, I think it was probably seeing Tuppy bowling his leg breaks and googly that made me take up leg spinning. I never turned it as much as Tuppy did. He had a fantastic turn in his bowling.
So I guess after school's cricket, the first, if I can use the word in inverted commas, seniors cricket you played would have been at university in England.
Well, not exactly, because just before I left school, I was invited to play for the senior Western Province side in the Currie Cup. The first match was against Rhodesia, which was playing as an ordinary province in South Africa at the time. And in the second innings, well, I was lucky to be missed in the first over, but I went on to play to get 90 not out. So I kept my place in the Western Province side that season.
Okay, what took you to, obviously university took you to England?
Well, I got a scholarship to Oxford and had 3 glorious years there. I think the opportunity to play cricket and rugby was quite unequaled anywhere else. I really enjoyed those 3 years.
So you weren't only a fine sportsman, you were a bit of a boffin as well. Clever boy.
Well, I think in those days the Rhodes scholarships were awarded more on one's sporting ability than on academic ability.
That's very modest of you. Most know that you were a double blue at Oxford, but not everybody knows that you were a double international as well.
I played in the 5 Nations series in 48, 49, early 1949, yes.
So rugby for England, cricket for South Africa, but how did that work? I mean, nowadays you have to qualify for about 10 years before you can switch countries.
Well, you know, 1949 was fairly soon after the war, and I don't think they worried too much about qualifications in England then. If one was ordinarily resident, as one was for 3 years, no one was going to quibble if one was invited to play for England, and I certainly didn't quibble. I also had a couple of games for the Barbarians, which was very nice. The Barbarian Tour of Wales was a great event, which I much enjoyed.
Splendid. Now, you toured England in 1951, which is when you made your debut for South Africa as a cricketer, at the age of, 23? Was that
yes, I would have been 23.
Yeah. Was that quite a daunting experience? Or?
Well, it was daunting, I think, one's first international match. But I had played quite a bit in England. I'd had a game for the gentlemen against the players when I was at Oxford, and incidentally had a century partnership with Trevor Bailey, who was later to come out with Peter May's side. So I had a bit of first-class cricket, but nevertheless I was a nervous batsman. After the second test, I was asked to bat number 3, which lessened the time for being nervous, but I remained nervous before going out to bat.
Don't feel lonely about that. I'm sure you're not the only one who's felt nervous. Moving on now to the MCC tour of South Africa, 1956-57, a much awaited tour?
Yes, it certainly was, because you know in those days we didn't have as many tours as we do today. South Africa was only playing against England, Australia and New Zealand, not against India, Pakistan, West Indies. And one had a tour less than once in 2 years in those days. In fact, the last English tour had been George Manside in 1948, 8 years before. And also, you know, recently England had beaten Australia, both in Australia and in England. And names like May and Cowdrey, Compton and Tyson and Statham were well known in South Africa, and we very much looked forward to seeing them.
And you in particular would have renewed one or two acquaintances because from your university days.
Yes, because Doug Insole had been captaining Cambridge when I was captain of Oxford. We played at Lord's. And they won, unfortunately. And the following year, Peter Bailey, not Peter Bailey, Peter May was in the Cambridge side, so I knew Peter May as well.
Was there, apart from the anticipation of the English coming here after, as you say, 8 years, was there also an anticipation of sort of fair play? What was the game played then in a much, not necessarily fairer way than it is now, but there seemed to be that camaraderie between both teams?
Yes. I can't say that I thought of that particularly, but I think I took it for granted. I think that's the way one was playing in those days. And in fact, it was confirmed by a couple of incidents during the tour, which are I think, typical of the sportsmanship that was displayed by the MCC side. I remember in the first test at the Wanderers, Dennis Compton was batting to Tayfield, and he hit one back to Tayfield only a few inches above the ground, and Huey caught it right on the ground. And Dennis just said to Huey, "Did you catch it, Huey?" And Huey said yes. And Dennis walked without waiting for a decision. And actually there was another incident in that, when I was in that same game, I think when I was batting to Cowdrey and snicked one, and when I looked round, Cowdrey had caught it right on the ground, and he just signalled that it was no catch, and you know, there was no appeal. So one had that kind of incident, which was very nice.
And that, of course, was a huge series for you.
Yes, in that sense, because I hadn't expected to. I had in fact told the selectors that if they wanted to choose me for the first 3 tests, that would be very nice, but I wasn't going to be available after the 3rd test because I was going to get married. And in the first test, we went up to the Wanderers, and only on the morning of the match did McGlue decide or make it clear that he wasn't going to play. So right at the 11th hour, I was asked to take over the captaincy with about an hour's notice. And I didn't really know our players that well. I'd played with 5 of them when New Zealand toured a couple of years before, but the other 5 I hadn't played with, and they were from different provinces. I was the only one from the Western Province, so I went out onto the field not knowing a great deal about our team.
And how was that as a captain, to handle your bowlers and field placings and things like that?
Well, actually I was lucky in the sense that on that first morning 3 batsmen went out early. I think Bailey, Peter May and Compton, and Richardson and Cowdrey then batted fairly cautiously in a long partnership which took up most of the day. So I had a bit of time to settle in and gradually get to know where the bowlers wanted their fielders.
Overall, though, sadly, the tour didn't get off to the greatest of starts, did it, with the first 2 test matches?
Well, not for us, it did for England, because they won comfortably in that first test at the Wanderers, I think by about 130 runs. It was quite a green wicket, and Bailey took advantage of it and bundled us out in our second innings. I think he took 5 of our leading wickets for 20 runs, and we were all out for 72. So that wasn't a good start for us. And in fact, the second was even worse because England won even more comfortably here at Newlands. The toss was important at Newlands in those days because it was a relatively easy, a slow wicket, relatively easy for the batsmen against the opening bowlers. But it took increasing turn from the second innings on. And Wardle bowled very well at Newlands. He took 5 wickets in the first innings and 7 in the second. We were quite unable to deal with his turn.
Yeah, that was probably goes down as Johnny Wardle's test match, and that game wasn't without incident either, was it? Wasn't there?
Oh yes, among Wardle's wickets, there was an unusual one in that Endine was given out for handling the ball. I can't remember who was bowling now, but I think it was Laker, and he slipped one onto his pad, and it went up high above his right shoulder, I think. And he was an international hockey player, and I think by hockey instinct he reached up to stop the ball falling on the wicket. And I can't remember the umpire now, but it was a well-known umpire. He gave him out immediately.
And not the only time that Russell Endine was to be involved in an incident.
Yes, in fact, in the 1951 tour, he'd been involved in a fairly similar incident at the Oval when Athelrone was bowling to Hutton. And again, Hutton got a snick, went up over his left shoulder, and with his hands on the bat, he tried to stop it hitting the wicket, and in the process obstructed Endine, who was keeping wicket. And after a few seconds, there was an appeal, and the umpire gave him out for obstructing the field.
Russell Endine on both occasions. Yes. Well, no, not really. Only the guilty party on one
and involved in the other.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned that we've got the first 2 tests of the 56-57 tour out of the way. You mentioned that you'd said that you weren't available for the 4th and 5th to the selectors because you were getting married after the 3rd. That didn't transpire.
No, Jackie McGlew was injured in the first game. He came back to captain in the second, but just before the 3rd test, he said his shoulder wasn't fit enough, and he withdrew from the series. And the selectors then asked me to stay on and to captain the side in the last 3, which I was happy to do. But it did mean that we had to cut short our honeymoon at Plettenberg Bay. In compensation, my wife was flown to the Wanderers for the 4th test, which she enjoyed, but she wasn't invited to stay with a team. Wives weren't allowed to stay with teams in those days, so she spent the last part of her honeymoon with my good friend from Oxford days, Robin Rudd.
Well, it seems that you made a great decision there, because South Africa then formed a tremendous fight back. The 3rd test was drawn.
Yes.
And you won the last 2 in order to
yes.
square the rubber.
The 3rd test was an interesting one because we led England on the first innings because Roy McLean made a century on his home ground with some powerful shots. Doug Insell then held us up by making a century, which was his first test century. And in the end, we had 190 to get in a few minutes over 4 hours. Now, that's not a great target, really, but in those days, in the slow batting series, and after our miserable second innings at Newlands, we batted a bit cautiously, and we were short. We should have batted more positively. I think we could have got it. It was a bit disappointing, but at any rate, it ended in a draw.
And the final 2 test matches, now you had to win them both.
Yes. Well, the 4th was a very exciting one at the Wanderers. Finally, we managed to win the toss, and Roy McLean again made a good score, 93. I ran him out, unfortunately. It wasn't
which I
entirely.
bet he's
It
never
wasn't.
forgiven you.
No, it wasn't entirely my fault. It was just as well we won the test. But we tried to force the pace in the second innings to give ourselves enough time to bowl England out, and only made 142, which meant England had to get 230 odd in 6 hours, just over 6 hours. I think Bailey was out right at the end of the fourth day. And England went very well, and I think it was Cowdrey and I can't remember his partner now, but they took and Insel, Cowdrey and Insel took the score to close to 150, so they're only about 80 short with 8 wickets to fall. But Insel was then out, and Compton and May followed fairly quickly after that. I think when Cowdrey was out, he hit one very hard back to Tayfield, because Cowdrey decided to go on the attack, and he hit one very hard into Tayfield's waist, and Tayfield wasn't one to let a chance go, particularly off his own bowling, and so Cowdrey was out. And then the English tailenders, they hit out, and I thought we were going to be undone at the end, but in fact Tayfield got the final 2 wickets, and we won by 17 runs, which is a small margin.
Absolutely.
Tayfield's brother was fielding on the boundary. He was substituting for someone, and he made the final catch on the boundary off Loader.
The 5th test, was that a little easier?
Well, that was also closely fought on. It was an unusual game because it really wasn't a test wicket. I think the ground on which we played was used for both rugby and cricket, and earlier in the season either the groundsman or his chairman had decided that the main pitch should be replaced, and they took up a practice wicket sod by sod and put it in the middle, and the wicket frankly wasn't ready by the 5th test. When we looked at it on the evening before the test, there were wide cracks. In fact, the wicket looked like a lot of small islands with cracks around them. And although watering overnight reduced the cracks for the opening, nevertheless those cracks widened all the time. And it made the ball, when the ball hit those cracks, it did unpredictable things, mainly shoot along the ground, but also deviate. So it was very difficult to bat.
So even the fast bowlers were a danger in those circumstances?
Yes, the fast bowlers were a danger, although it tended to shoot rather than get up. And England were, unfortunately for them, without Statham, who'd been bowling well, and also Wardle, who was unfit. Tyson bowled for them, and in the second innings bowled well. He bowled at a reduced pace for the sake of accuracy, relying on the pitch to take his wickets. I don't say the pitch took them all, but nevertheless the pitch helped. But yes, the fast bowlers were difficult. But it was Tayfield who actually took a lot of wickets in the second innings.
He had a fantastic series, didn't
Yes,
he?
he did.
Now, Frank Tyson, nicknamed Typhoon because of his pace. You watch a lot of cricket today. Just how quick was Frank Tyson? Was Typhoon Tyson?
Well, I didn't really see him at his quickest. I mean, we read the reports on how he'd bundled out the Aussies in Australia, I think to a lesser extent in England, and he obviously had been very quick, but I don't think he bowled it at the same pace in South Africa. He was hampered a bit by illness in the middle of the tour, and in fact Loader was preferred to him in the 3rd test and afterwards. It was only when Statham wasn't available in the 5th test that he was brought back, and then he did well in that test, but he wasn't bowling very fast.
Let's leave the cricket for a second, and just discuss perhaps some of the characters of yesteryear that you played against or with, particularly in that sort of series. Dennis Compton was part of that series. I don't think he had the most successful of series with the bat, although he hardly let the team down. But he must have been one of the characters.
Oh, he certainly was. He was a very popular player. We enjoyed playing against him. He was very good fun, and he enjoyed himself on the tour. I think, like the rest of the MCC side, because they were well entertained. I think both at one or two official functions and privately. And I can remember Dennis enjoying himself. And of course I knew Doug Insole well and Peter May, and I played against a number of the other English players. Ivan Compton was the outstanding character, I would say. On our side, we also had our characters. I don't think that series produced new characters. Our team was a fairly experienced one in the sense that McGlue, who didn't play very much, but Waite and Endine and Tayfield and McLean had 4 or 5 series by then. The others less, Adcock and Heine. Adcock and Heine were a fine pair. I mean, they were. I can't now think of any South African combination of opening bowlers that were better than Adcock and Heine. They were tall and fast. Adcock had the more fluent action, both run-up and action, beautiful flowing action. Heine was more strongly built, and he displayed his strength in his action. He was aggressive. But if he managed to hit a batsman in the ribs, he shouted for the ball so that he could keep up the attack. They were a very, very good pair.
Of course, one must remember too, Clive, that quite a lot of the England touring side were professional cricketers, perhaps a couple of amateurs, but South Africa, you weren't getting paid to play cricket in those days, were you?
No, we weren't. We were all amateurs there. In that era, I don't think any South African player was paid for playing. 1 or 2 had been to England to play as professional cricketers, like my uncle, Jimmy Blankenberg. But no one was paid for playing in South Africa at the time. We played club cricket over weekends, and incidentally in Cape Town we weren't allowed to play on Sundays, so we only had the Saturday afternoon. And in an ordinary season when there was no visiting team, we would have about 6 interprovincial games for which one could get leave, so that it had a slight compensating advantage for South Africa in that our best schoolboy and university cricketers were able to go on playing in the top level of cricket because they could get leave to go off for 5 or 6 3-day games. Whereas in England, I think quite a few good schoolboy and cricketers and university cricketers were lost to the England Test team because they couldn't afford to play continuous county cricket.
Did it help you get out of the army as well?
Well, fortunately at that time we weren't having to do army service in South Africa.
I know it helped a few after you.
Yeah. Our children were later, but unfortunately.
Now, Australia's tour of South Africa in 1957-58, you captained 4 of the 5 test matches. Would I be right in saying that Jackie McGlue was basically earmarked as Jack Cheatham's successor, and that your success against England in McGlue's absence gave you the nod to captain against the Australians?
Yes, I think that was correct, and I was invited to captain, I think, in the first couple of games against Australia. I can't remember whether it was for the series, but in fact I was injured for the first game, so I split the webbing between 2 fingers and I couldn't play. So Jackie McGlue again captained in the first test against Australia, but I captained in the remaining 4.
Tough series for you, that one.
Yes, it was. It was a disappointing series because I thought we were as good or nearly as good as the Aussies, and the Aussies lost against England, and we shared a series against England. And in a sense, we were. I mean, the Aussies won 3-0, but that wasn't a fair reflection of the tour because we had much the better of the first test at the Wanderers, and also the third test, Durban, but it couldn't quite drive home our lead on the first innings. They were played to a draw. But in the second test at Newlands, we again lost the toss as we had against Peter May, and Australia made full advantage of it with Benno and Klein taking advantage of the turning wicket and bowling us out for a very small total, which which again spoilt our confidence for the third test, and we didn't bat positively enough in Durban. And then we lost the fourth and the fifth. Well, you know, the Aussies are difficult to beat, so it's not too surprising, but it was a disappointing series for us.
And it was, what did you, it was around, yeah, you would have been a few days short of 30 when you retired from Test cricket. Was that through business or just
well,
family?
in fact, I was at the bar, which made it a bit difficult, and between the two tours, Peter May's tour and the Australian tour, I actually went into Parliament, and that made it impossible, really. I was trying to build up a practice at the bar, and I couldn't really afford the time. So sadly, I didn't go on playing after that stage.
Well, Clive, thank you very much for affording this time. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
It was interesting. Thank you.